Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are here today for a discussion on making a bigger impact through collaboration as a senior individual contributor. This webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack in order to answer some of your questions in the hashtag Staff Plus channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of your questions live. So please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Alice Lee, and we have 4 extremely accomplished engineers here today with us to share their experiences and insights. So let's get started with sharing a little bit about who we are, what we do, and one icebreaker fact about us, which is, what is your most used emoji and why? So I'll start off. Again, I'm Alice Lee. I'm a staff engineer at Squarespace working on an email marketing platform called Campaigns. And my most used emoji is the purple heart emoji because my favorite color is purple. So let's start off. I'll go around whoever I see first on my screen. Let's start off with Kieran, and we'll go in the order like counterclockwise.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alice. My name is Erin Archer. I'm a senior principal engineer at Zendesk. And at Zendesk, I'm a member of the 10-strong global architecture team. And I'm personally working out of the Dublin office in Ireland. I'm looking forward to the webinar to share some thoughts on how to be successful IC, and also to learn from the panel here and from the others on the call, other people on the call. As for my most used emoji, I've actually got 2. Sorry, I couldn't pick one. So my first one is it's the heart 2 emoji. Well, that's what it is at Zendesk, and it's like a bouncing digital heart. And that's basically the one that I use to show that I care about what people are doing. And it's kind of digital looking, so I think it's appropriate. And then the other one I really like is the grimacing cat one, which will probably resonate with anyone who's worked with software. You know, you get a sore face from grimacing at times working with software. So, but that's part of the fun of it, right? So yeah, that's my other one.
Awesome. Next is Dan.
Hey, I'm Dan Na. I'm the Senior Engineering Manager of International at Squarespace. Previous to moving back into management, I was a staff engineer at Squarespace. And then previous to Squarespace, I was a software engineer and engineering manager at Etsy. My most used emoji is probably the thinking emoji, just because I think it's so versatile. It's, you know, both when it's like when something is confusing or something is highly suspect or something is deeply insightful. I think it just does a really good job of covering a wide range of emotions that I regularly feel at work.
Awesome. Joy?
Yeah, I'm Joy Eberts. I'm a principal engineer at Split. Prior to Split, I was at Box, where I dabbled in management for a little while and decided I didn't like it and came back to the IC track. My most used emoji is the joy emoji, which I guess the obvious reason is because of my name. So every time I have any sort of like slightly happy feeling, I'm like, well, I have to use the joy emoji. I have no choice here. And the other reason is I'm generally a fairly happy person. So
yep. That's awesome. Leslie?
Hey, yeah, so I'm Leslie Chapman. I am a distinguished engineer at Comcast in beautiful Center City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is also where I live. My favorite emoji is the high five emoji. I tend to use that all the time, probably more in the past, year and a half, because we can't really high five in person anymore. And the one that we have in like our Comcast corporate Slack, I really also enjoy, because it's like a pale hand and a darker hand high-fiving, and I think that's really cool.
That's super cool to me too. I would love to give you all virtual high fives for this. So awesome. Let's get into the discussion then. So when we get into the more senior levels of being an individual contributor, the more collaboration becomes like intrinsic to our work. because we often find ourselves in the position of making technical decisions and needing to surface them or advocate for them. So I think a lot of us can probably relate to seeing our calendars like slowly fill up over time with meetings we take on, as we work more cross-functionally, unfortunately, right? I always like to compare being a staff plus engineer to being a leader who manages horizontally across their peers in an organization, versus those on the management track who would manage vertically up towards leadership and down towards the direct reports. So we happen to be in this unique position where we're not exactly managers and don't carry concrete authority, but we still carry the responsibility of needing to wield our influence in order to be impactful in our ideas. The transition between being a heads down IC and having this larger impact across your organization oftentimes requires like understanding how all the moving parts of your organization connect together and how to break down silos between these pieces. And collaboration is pretty much at every step along the way. So since this may not come very naturally to a lot of ICs, like how would one even get started? So luckily, to answer these questions, I am joined by a few experts in doing just that. So let's jump into those questions. And as a reminder to our audience, you can submit your questions in the Staff Plus channel, and we'll get to them towards the end. First off, let's kick it off with what impactful collaboration looks like to you, and if you have any success stories to share. So let's start with Leslie and go around the panel.
Oh yeah. So I'm so glad that you actually brought up the term cross-functional, because when I think of what impactful collaboration means, it's when we can drop the moniker cross-functional team and just call ourselves a team. Because you hit the nail on the head, you have to work across so many different verticals. And, I'll give a success story, which was the X1 platform that I worked on. So that's a television platform that has over 35 million customers across several different nations. And television delivery is incredibly difficult, as I'm sure you can imagine, from the UI on the front end, how people interact with it, accessibility, to actual video delivery and decryption, and being able to work across all of those silos and calling yourself one team, even though you report up to different senior leaders, that is a success story. And the way I've always looked at it is that it's all about listening. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's not about dictating. It's about listening to what everyone has to say. In my particular role on that project, I was on the client side or the UI front end side. So of course I had to advocate for them, but a lot of times that actually meant acquiescing to other teams and listening to why we had to do that, coming to a compromise, and then celebrating those successes afterwards. That's how I look at it. It's like when we all win together and we all walk away happy and we want to work together again, that's successful collaboration.
Always trying to go for that win-win scenario, right?
Yes.
Would anyone else like to chime in? Perhaps Kieran?
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what Leslie said there. It's about connecting across the org. And yeah, like, I mean, I was working on a project there recently, and at Zendesk, we were trying to kind of build this, create this technical foundation across multiple products, right? And, we wanted to be able to route work to Zendesk agents no matter where it came from. And actually the collaboration doesn't really start with your technical peers. Like the collaboration starts with product. It's actually like talking to product, listening in on customer interviews, trying to understand like what it is that our customers need and what product they're trying to build. And I love that part because you get to ask really dumb questions, right? And you get to kind of go in and really kind of go, look, I don't really understand this, explain it to me, And that's great because like Leslie was saying, you're listening, right? You know, you're starting to build up this rapport. And then eventually, like, you know, it gives you quite a lot of respect for the work that the PMs are doing day to day. So you get this empathy with them. But of course, out of that drops the non-functional requirements, you know, the things that you realize, like for them to build this, like what are we going to have to build on the back end, you know, to support this, and what's the technical architecture going to have to look like? And then I think like you start with product wearing one hat like that. And then at a certain point, you start to work with engineering teams, you know, to kind of like, how are they going to interface with the system? Again, this empathy that you have to have with them. They've got systems they're trying to run and operate, and then you're coming along with these requirements to integrate. And so you have to understand like what works for them. You know, like it's not about like me coming and just saying, you got to do this. You got to kind of get them on side with your vision, and bring them along with it. So yeah, like I think that's key. You know, and one other thing I'd add is that I found it really useful to anchor things around visuals when you're working with teams. Like one of the things is, you know, it's important to write documents and so on, but I think a really good diagram is accessible to so many people. And I've often had situations where, you know, you can present that to a product manager to explain how the system's going to work together, get them to adjust it or tweak it. And, you know, you really hit the nail on the head when they start presenting it to other people, right? You know, and you're like, wow, we are aligned on this stuff, you know? Yeah, so that's kind of top of mind for me.
Yeah, that's an amazing takeaway to really like rely on visuals when you're dealing with especially like PMs and other non-technical people. That's a great tip. Dan, would you like to chime in?
The only thing I think I would add is something that Kieran said that resonates with me is like when I look back on kind of like the flagship projects of my career, I think a mark of an impactful, highly collaborative project is that a lot of people are excited to see it launch, right? Like you've had the empathy to like understand the requirements across the org, to like talk to people to see, you know, would this actually solve a big problem for them, to the point where not only are you and your team excited for this thing to launch, but when it launches, actually like an org is excited for it to launch. That's kind of like, I find that to be like kind of like an output of successful collaboration, is just like when you have all those, when you build all the allies along the way.
Yeah, empathy and gaining that allyship is definitely like pillars, I would say, to collaboration, especially impactful collaboration. Joy?
Yeah, I don't know that I have too much to add on the what it looks like side, but I have a little bit on the other side. So when I was at Box, I was part of an effort to split up our monolith, which I'm sure is familiar to a lot of you. But the thing about it was that it was actually our third attempt to do this. So the first two both just completely did not get off the ground. The first one just didn't get enough buy-in from anyone really to really make much progress. There was some good thinking, but it just sort of collapsed almost immediately. The second attempt did better, but the thing is, like, we had a team of really smart people. They built a bunch of infrastructure, but then the first team they tried to get to use it had a bunch of use cases that they didn't support at all. So like there was a complete mismatch. And then that team was like, well, this thing is junk. Like, we don't want to use it. And I think even if they had come around and supported their use cases, it was too late. They'd lost the trust. So the third attempt, we really had to work really hard on building that trust, listening to the people, figuring out what the first cases would be. And honestly, we ended up having to build in a way that was most people would consider non-traditional for splitting a monolith project. We picked things to pull out that weren't necessarily the easy things to pull out because we needed to prove to everyone else, like, yes, we can do this. This is actually going to work this time. So I would say almost that our first two attempts that failed made it even harder for us when we eventually were able to pull it off. So something to keep in mind as well.
Learning from your failures is definitely important. Let's stick with you, Joy. You transitioned from people management back to the technical individual contributor side. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and what skills you gained from management that you could then apply to collaboration as an IC?
Yeah, I would say that there were a few different things. So some of it was just better understanding how people work and how they think. And I mean, as a manager, you are meeting with a wide variety of people regularly and understanding their career goals and like trying to help coach them. And it really just forced me to understand like, what are people's incentives, and like seeing I had engineers that were wildly different. Like one of them would get upset if I like even like hinted at feedback, and then another one who wouldn't get it unless I was like very, very blunt and like we might have to fire you if you don't fix this sort of end of things. And so kind of understanding how people are really different. So there was a lot from that side, and also just kind of empathy, the empathy side of things too. One of the things that I feel like was most helpful to me was understanding managers better, and like understanding the motivations for why my manager might be asking me certain things, or what I could be doing to help my manager out better, in terms of like when I was asking for feedback, asking for very specific feedback instead of just saying to my manager, do you have feedback? Which like, it's very hard for them to like come up with something, but being able to say like, oh, do you have feedback on that presentation I gave at the meeting the other day? Then it's much more concrete for them and easier for them to coach me. And I guess, yeah, using them to leverage them to like get me connections in other places. And again, just like being very specific about what I asked for was really helpful.
Yeah, I feel like both managing down and managing up has like such like critical skills that can teach you how to manage sideways as an IC. But yeah, likewise, Dan, you made the opposite transition from Joy, going from a staff engineer to an engineering manager. How would you say this has informed your perspective on how ICs can better collaborate, and how you're now able to use your position as a people manager to facilitate that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I actually say a lot of things that are similar to things that Joy just said. So I think there are two things that I can do as a manager to facilitate better IC collaboration. So the first one I think is coaching engineers through organizational dynamics. Sometimes I feel like engineers can have this misconception that staying the IC track means you are quote unquote you stay out of the politics of the work. And I think that's true to an extent, especially at lower levels of the IC track. But as you climb the ladder, I think you find, or at least I find, that the hardest problems are cross-functional by nature, and collaboration is critical to reach strong outcomes. And so with collaboration comes people, and people are messier and less deterministic than computers are. And so that at times can be very frustrating. So helping ensure that engineers can stay on track for work, not get burned out by that dynamic, like coaching them through, people are the fundamental aspect of my job. And so I have experience, managing that part of it. And so just helping others kind of like understand that part and not get burnt out by it, I think is a big thing. The second thing is, and it's kind of closely related to that. I think by function of my title, by being on the manager track, I do have some explicit organizational authority to unblock and escalate some decisions. And so when it's appropriate, I will lean into that authority to help, because I feel like sometimes it can feel like you get stuck as an IC. I felt that. And when you have someone who sponsors you and can speak up for you and bring your concerns to the table, that can really help push something along.
Yeah, I hear all the time that in terms of mentorship, there's like over mentoring and under sponsoring. So sponsorship is definitely key in helping other ICs reach that next level. And on that note, does anyone have advice on how ICs can dip their toes into influencing the infrastructure or tech strategy of their organizations? Let's go around the panel and kick it off with Kieran.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. And yeah, it's something that you probably spend quite a lot of time thinking about as a senior IC. And I think the key to understanding, influencing what technical decisions are made is to understand how those decisions are actually made. And it sounds like a kind of a weird thing to say, but in smaller organizations, like my experience at least has been that technical decisions tend to be made in a very ad hoc way. It can sometimes just be, you know, a group of engineers who are, you know, tenured or who've been there a long time. And sometimes it can be quite hard as a less experienced engineer, as maybe somebody coming into the company, to understand how you influence those decisions, right? You know, it feels like it's all like, am I part of the network? You know, like how does that happen? So like, I think like if I was in a company like that and kind of in a leadership position, like the first thing I would do is I would try to create a situation where you know, we're kind of changing how decisions are made, like the process in making decisions, and you're trying to move the organization from a mode of operation where you have this ad hoc approach to a more explicit process around making decisions that anyone can actually partake in, and ideally based on written proposals around technical changes, right? So yeah, if you're lucky, your organization will have a process like that, some kind of process that allows you to propose a change in some way. And you know, I think that's where you start. You know, like you start by kind of tapping into this process at your organization, reading the proposals that are being put up. Often when you start, you're like going, what is this? Like, I don't understand anything, you know, but after a while, as you start to soak up the organization, what it does, you know, you'll start to understand a lot more. And then you can start to participate in discussions. You know, you can start to make comments on proposals that affect your area. You can just even ask clarifying questions. And eventually you'll probably get to that point then when you're ready to write that first proposal. And my advice would be, like, don't just publish it and just go, right? Like, you know, ask someone like a mentor, if you have one, a peer or someone else who's, you know, done it before, ask them to review it, and then circulate it to like a small group, right? You know, like you can take your technical proposal and give it to a smaller group first and get some feedback. And there might be some, you know, holes or gaps in your proposal. You can fill that without having to do it in front of the entire organization, if you know what I mean. And then you can iterate on that. You know, it's like how we build software, right? You're iterating on your proposal. And then eventually you get to the point where you're ready to publish that and you're hardening it all the way along. And the other thing, the last thing I'd say is that, you know, as a senior IC reviewing a proposal, right? So you're on the other side of it. I would say always remember that the author could be doing this for the first time, right? You know, so be kind to them. Ideally, it's great if you have contribution guidelines published around these kind of proposals, so that everyone is clear about how they should be acting and interacting, and you know, assuming good intent. So yeah, like I think they're all kind of examples of how you can start dipping in and organizing that. But it's about looking at the existing system, if there is one. If you're in a position where you don't have a system, try to get one in place, and then start to dip your toe in, you know, and start on a smaller scope and gradually increase.
Yeah. So we have kind of a similar situation to that at Squarespace. Dan, do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
I mean, I think you're referring to like RFC review and architecture review and stuff like that. That is what I thought of when Karen was talking. It's like, I think to dip your toes in, you can begin, like we have channels and meetings where people will propose architectural changes in a structured document that follows a template. And the ability to, and it's not necessarily gated on a level. It's like you can comment on anyone's RFC, like as you should be able to. And I think if you're not necessarily comfortable writing RFCs yourself or authoring them yet, just participating in that will just get you the reps to understand, like, this is what a strong RFC looks like. This is what the review process generally looks like. This is the type of feedback I can expect. And so when it does come time to write one yourself, it's not as intimidating.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's good that like everything's like just kept out in the open for everyone to see. Leslie, do you have any thoughts on how ICs can contribute to technical strategy?
Yeah, and I think we were chatting about like influence too, right? Like, so first of all, I'm going to give a total like advertisement right now that I will be giving an entire talk at Staff Plus Live in New York on this exact subject. But as a teaser, you know, it's hard to influence especially when you don't have like direct reports, right? And for me, I've always thought about this as building trust, really. To everything Kieran said and Dan said, like, yes, you need to put it into action by doing your due diligence and documentation. But I do think that there is a portion of it that involves building your brand and your brand being trustworthy. So that when somebody sees my name attached to something, they already know I'm not BSing them. I've done my due diligence. I'm leading with empathy, and I'll listen to their feedback. And because I've built that brand for myself, it makes it easier to influence these decisions. Because I already, when people see my name, I walk into the room as, we can trust Leslie. Everybody makes mistakes, but Leslie will own it when she makes a mistake. She'll learn from her failures. She won't pretend to know things she doesn't, to what Kieran said, asking questions. I don't care if you're a junior engineer, a staff engineer, or the CTO. None of us know everything. And so having that humility of saying, I know what I know what I don't know, can lead to building that trust and can lead to being able to influence people.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that as senior ICs ourselves, we can lead by asking questions that more junior folks might feel afraid to ask, right? Joy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I actually have a slightly different example than what people have been giving. So fairly early in my career, I was fairly lucky in that I got asked to be a part of an API working group. And what this group was essentially trying to make sure our public APIs specifically, but also our internal ones, but mostly our public ones, were consistent across all of our different teams. And so we were sort of I don't want to say gatekeepers, because we really tried to work with the people and not, just like sign off and make people's lives hard. But I'd say this was lucky because it sort of is similar to an architecture type group in that, like, I got to influence a lot of different people. I got to, start reading these proposals, and it's a very similar sort of process and very similar sort of thing, but it's in a constrained field, which is why as a more junior person, I was able to get onto that committee. And so it really was a way for me to start to understand this like influence stuff and like how to go about bringing consensus and learn about things and like build those connections cross team early on, despite not necessarily being there quite yet. So if you have opportunities like that, definitely consider taking them.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this leads into like, how can ICs show that they understand the bigger picture in an org? I think we sort of touched on this before, but let's expand a little bit into it, because Leslie gave a great talk recently about delegating to more junior engineers. Do you think you can give more insight on how you were to guide that big picture understanding in more junior engineers and how you obtained it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. As we've hinted on here, no, not just hinted on, we're talking about it, right? Like, as a senior individual contributor, you are a leader and you wear so many hats. Like, you got here because you were great at the tech. But you need to understand the customer. You need to understand your product managers and the actual, business drivers, including resources and budgets. And all of that goes into being a senior individual contributor. And once you've kind of grokked all of that, paying it forward. And so explaining to the junior engineers when they don't understand, when a junior engineer is like, I read about this cool new technology, why aren't we using it? I'm not the kind of person who's ever going to say, because I said so. Like, you're going to sit down and have a conversation and explain, like, okay, well, these are our business constraints. These are our resource constraints. This is why it's really important that we get this out for our customers or for our stock price, for all of our stakeholders. And so I think that transparency is really important in helping people understand the bigger picture. It's explaining to them the bigger picture and putting trust in them that they're smart enough to understand it. I wish I would have gotten more of that when I was a junior engineer, because I had those types of people that were because I said so. And it made me feel little. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough or smart enough. And, to the point of like my talks about delegation, this is all about putting people in line to be your successors. Like, I don't want to be in this exact same position next year or in 5 years. So I need to groom people to step into my shoes. And I can't do that by withholding information. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just, if I know it, there's no secret sauce. If it's in my brain, I want to dump it into yours so that I can clear out room to put more stuff in my brain.
Yeah, delegation is absolutely necessary. Any other thoughts on this topic? Perhaps a manager who delegates down on how ICs can show that they understand the bigger picture in an org.
I mean, I can just speak personally. I think as I've like gained more experience, I 100% agree with what Leslie just said. Like, engineering is a means to a healthy business, not an ends in itself. So like, I think the more you understand the business, the more you can contextualize organizational incentives, which then helps you navigate politics, which then helps you collaborate better, right? So they're all like coupled. I think one strategy that's actionable for me, that has borne a lot of fruit personally, is talking to people outside of engineering, like, which is marketing, business development, customer operations, et cetera. Like, understanding acronyms like ARPU, which I would never understand as an engineer. And just like slowly building that context, because like, once I can contextualize how the executives think about the business, that should map to how I present like an engineering initiative, because it should ideally map into one of those initiatives, right? And so for me, it's just trying to, piece together. I find that as I grow in my career, understanding the business becomes more and more important to not only like the effectiveness of managing up, but also just like ensuring that my team and ensuring that my team is working on the right things, like strategically.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in on how ICs can understand the bigger picture in their org? Looks like you're being thoughtful about it, Kieran.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything, massively insightful to add. I think they're all great contributions. I think like just keeping your eyes open, right? Keeping your mind open. Ideally, like I was saying, the organization gives you an opportunity to do that. Often you'll have things like, planning meetings or, roadmap readouts or whatever organizations call them. And I think that's a great opportunity to kind of like get up and look across the organization and kind of understand what other teams are doing. And I think obviously as a senior IC, that's going to give you a little bit of a kind of a view into things that are that you might want to cross connect. Like they might be talking about doing some search feature or whatever, and you're like, hey, hang on a minute, that's interesting. We kind of do that over here. Maybe we should connect those people up. So I think it's important that the organization kind of gives the opportunity to kind of see what's going on. But if they do, it's up to you to look, and to actually, step and kind of, step into that a little bit.
Absolutely. Do you have any remaining thoughts on this, Joy?
Not really on this question, but something Leslie had sort of stuck in my head about her explaining to more junior engineers like why we might not be doing something. I attended a panel a number of years ago, and somebody there was talking about how being a mother had taught her a lot about managing engineers. And the example she gave was, there was some parenting book. So this is like third hand at this point, so I'm sorry if I get it vastly wrong. But essentially, if your kid comes to you and asks for a sparkle pony, you can't just say like, no, we're not getting one, because that's not going to go over well. So instead, the strategy is to be like, oh yeah, that's amazing. It would be so great that we could do this, we could do that. But oh, somebody's going to have to feed it. How are we going to get that done? And then like you slowly ask these questions and bring it around until the kid is like, oh yeah, okay, maybe that's not a good idea. And and she was basically saying like, that's the same thing with engineers. Instead of just saying like, no, that's a terrible idea. Instead be like, oh, that's a great idea. I would love if we could do that, but how are we going to make this work? And then just kind of like letting them think through, oh, maybe this is why it's not a good idea. So that's really stuck with me. And I always think about that.
Yeah, definitely more of like a yes and kind of scenario rather than like immediately poo-pooing people. So we have a question from the audience. And again, for anyone attending, you can drop your questions in the QA function. Meg Dasco says, I love what Leslie said about passing along information to more junior ICs. Any advice for pushing junior ICs who don't seem to want to become independent to become more independent to free up that time? So anyone can jump in, not just Leslie, if you would like to tackle this one.
You know, I'll start by saying I think the first thing there is if they seem hesitant, talk about what their plan is, right? Like we should all, whether you put it in some formal HR system or not, you should in the back of your head have a goal, right? Of where you want to be in the future. And so for pushing someone who maybe doesn't want to become independent, there's probably something they want to become more independent in. And so figuring that out, you know, do you know what I mean? Like there's so many different aspects of being an engineer. And so looking at the various ways that we all contribute, there's probably something there. And maybe it's just, you just got to dig a little bit. Like, I started out my career in embedded engineering. And I kind of, you know, just personally, I lost the love that I had for it. And I didn't even know until someone brought it to me that I might be interested in like front end GUI work. And then all of a sudden it like re-sparked my entire love of engineering. So, you know, maybe it's just kind of asking those leading questions because there has to be something there. But it might involve thinking really outside of the box.
For sure. Anyone else want to chime in on pushing junior ICs to become more independent?
Yeah, so I think my question here is like, I think I would try to drill down on what it is. Often when I encounter this type of sentiment, it's imposter syndrome. And I think imposter syndrome is real. I think acknowledging it is very empowering for people. And, you know, just, you know, everyone goes through this, that's fine. But I think it's a psychological safety problem. Like, are they afraid of failing? Do they not know what to do? Like, should the guidance through this thing be a bit more heavy-handed for now? Because like, until they're comfortable with taking a certain level of, you know, unknowns. And so whenever, yeah, it's hard for me to think that someone who is new to their career would be like, no, I'm done learning. That's enough for me, right? It's probably more that they're not comfortable taking a risk. And so mitigating the downside parts of taking that risk, I feel like, are kind of the assignment in this situation. So yeah.
That's so real. And sometimes we just need to dig into, like, again, like Leslie said, like what really drives them. Kieran or Joy, any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, like, I mean, I was gonna say pretty much what Dan said, you know, like, I think these are the soft management skills, you know, like these are the skills that you need to like talk to people about what they're worried about, you know, talk to them about why they're not confident, you know. I totally agree about the imposter syndrome stuff. Like, I think most people who've got to a senior IC position have gone through it. So yeah, like I think it is a confidence thing, you know, and it's about making people feel safe to take on extra responsibility. So 100% on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I guess One thought is like 2 engineers that I've worked with, one of them decently senior, but if you talk to him, he's like, yeah, I'm at the level I want to be at. I don't actually want to go to a higher level. So, figuring that out early, because like trying to coach him into a higher level, that's just like a losing proposition. He's not going to be happy. Like, you're not going to be happy. Everybody's going to be frustrated. And then like the other one, it's sort of this imposter syndrome. And for that one, it's not really a fear of failure so much as just like, not thinking they're good enough. So it's a little bit more of just like, okay, yeah, no, that was actually really good. And making sure you praise their accomplishments a little bit more and like nudge them from a positivity standpoint of like, yeah, I know a lot of other people don't always tell you when you've done well, but I see you and I noticed that you did this and I think that's really awesome. I would love to see you do more of that, and just kind of push from that end of things.
Yeah, and I'd add as well to that, just really quickly, that like, I think as a senior IC, like you have tremendous influence in that way. Like if you go to a more junior engineer and you give them that feedback one-to-one, or you drop a feedback note through your HR system or whatever, like that can be incredibly impactful to help them get through. Like they're like, here's somebody who is at a level that they're aspiring to, and they're saying, you're doing it, you're doing it, keep it up, you're moving in that direction. So yeah, I think it's great to be able to do that, and kind of again gear up the confidence, right?
Great. So we're coming up to time. Let's have like one last quick question where we can get everyone's thoughts on this big existential question. It comes up with some regularity among a lot of Staff Plus folks on how to lead without authority. And I like to compare this to being like the fulcrum on a lever. The closer the fulcrum is to the load, i.e. the technical matter, the more effective we can become as force multipliers. But the actual force being applied are the managers and leadership who have the authority. So, or in like more of a pop culture Game of Thrones sense, we're more like the hand of the king instead of the king. Like as Tyrion Lannister says, like, I drink and I know things. So how does one overcome this barrier of leading without authority? I know a lot of folks have a hot take on it. So let's just kind of quickly give our own thoughts on it and start with Kieran.
Yeah, I'll quickly just give my thoughts on this one. Like, yeah, I think, you can obviously have the kind of positional authority and, be able to ask people to do stuff who are under your authority. But I think like even those leaders, the best of those leaders, they influence through having a vision. And I think if you can have a vision for where the organization needs to go, you can get people to buy into that vision. You can help them get there by explaining like, here's the steps you need to take to get to that end state. And I think ICs can, work with that vision. If you have a vision, like whether it's an engineering strategy vision or a product vision or whatever, you can kind of help direct multiple efforts towards that common vision. And it's all about like kind of you're borrowing the authority of the vision, if you know what I mean, right? And often that vision is going to come from like senior, VPs, or maybe from an architecture team, or an infrastructure team, and they're saying we're going in this direction. And that's like really powerful because it allows that, it allows that team, different teams, different individual contributors at different levels to actually borrow the authority of that vision and make plans that are aligned with that vision. And so that, in my opinion, gives like a lot of power to ICs who are trying to, move and influence things.
Awesome. Leslie, you had a big talk on it. What are your thoughts?
All right, unmuted. I think a big part of it is building your network of trust, being the person that like other people want to work with. Like if I'm building a team or I've been assigned an item, I think part of the influence is like people hear, oh, Leslie's on that team? Yeah, that sounds like fun. I liken it to like, and we should have fun. We shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. We should have fun, whether I'm planning a girls' brunch out, I want all my girlfriends that I invite to say like, Leslie's brunches are always the best. Like that's what the same thing I want people to say at work. Like Leslie's projects are fun to like everything everybody said here, in terms of like We're going to work together. We're going to be kind. We're going to have empathy on this project, and we are going to celebrate the heck out of it when we're done.
Awesome. Dan?
I don't have a hot take. I have like a weird lukewarm take on this question. And the reason I say that is because, and I think this is like 100% because I'm on the management ladder. I kind of separate these things in my head. And I feel like this question is kind of like linking them together. Influence. So what I mean by that is like, I am on the management ladder, right? And there are two ladders at our company and at many companies, there's an IC track and a management track. And so by definition, because there are parallel ladders, I have peers at my level in a technical capacity and above me at a technical capacity. And I think they are better suited to make the technical calls. I'm not saying that engineering management isn't technical. It is. It needs to be, right? I need to have smells. I need to be able to like question people on some of their decisions and like, encourage them to hash those things out. But at the end of the day, like, the technical influence comes from the senior ICs on my team, and I'm relying on them to like be in the code and understand the implications of the architectural decisions. And we will balance each other out, but I'm nothing without their technical leadership, right? So like, yes, I ultimately have some organizational authority to say yes or no, or go or no go on various initiatives. But I guess what I'm saying is that like technical leadership and authority, technical influence and authority are different, but they work in lockstep in service of strong technical outcomes. And yeah, I don't often view like if I'm using my authority to gatekeep strong technical outcomes, that's just me not doing my job as a manager, right? So yeah.
Definitely. Joy?
Yeah, I have sort of a similar take to Dan in that I don't think authority is actually something to be sought after. So for me, my current team is over half in Argentina at the moment, and their society is just slightly more deferential. And so they're more likely to just kind of go along with whatever I say. So I have more authority in that sense. But the thing that I've realized pretty quickly is that means that I'm getting less of that diversity of thought. I'm getting less of those good ideas. They're smart people. They have opinions about all of this. So it's been an interesting path of then I find myself going to them more one-on-one or trying to get their take on things before I give my own, and like trying to make sure that I'm getting the full thought from all of them around me before I try to say, okay, I think this is the direction we should go, and trying to make sure that I can gain buy-in from them, because they might not tell me that they're not bought in just by doing something, which is extra dangerous, right? Because they might go along with it, but then down the road, they're not going to be the one championing the idea themselves because they're not really fully bought in. So trying to make sure that you can actually gain that full influence without authority is, I would say, more powerful than if you have the authority.
Amazing thoughts. Thank you, everyone. These were some amazing takeaways on how senior ICs can facilitate better collaboration to make more effective and impactful work, and how this can potentially bring you to the next level in your career. So thank you, everyone on the panel, so much for all your insights. We'll all be heading over to the Lead Dev Slack in the #Staff+ channel now. So please go there and continue the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.